then just to ensure that small players get to a level where they're able to pay and comply. Yeah.
Of course, this is part of efforts to increase the tax base, so that one side of the population is not overburdened with contributing to taxation. But as you said, there needs to be, a threshold and a sensible one for that matter, to ensure that small players are not kept small, that they don't grow to be part of the big players. So when you look at the finance bill as well, there's the infrastructure bonds no longer having a tax, being tax-free. There's now a 5% imposed on interest earned for bonds that have at least 3 years maturity period. What do you make of these, especially in terms of investor confidence in the country?
Yeah, so perhaps it's just good to put a bit of context around infrastructure bonds.
Go ahead.
So these are bonds that are issued by governments or public entities, because they're public entities, for purposes of investing in infrastructure, hence the name infrastructure bond. And so you want to build roads, you want to build dams, you want to do your electricity distribution, you can issue a bond and pay interest on that bond, because essentially you are borrowing from the public. Now, in order to encourage the uptake of these bonds, one of the tax incentives that came in was when we pay you an interest from this bond, which is an infrastructure bond, then that interest will be tax exempt. In other words, you don't pay any tax on the interest that you earn. And you can compare that with the interest that you earn maybe from a bank, for example, or your M-Shwari or M-Pesa deposits. So that interest is subject to tax at 15%. Now, one might ask, why are we seeing a rollback in these interest rates, in the taxation of this interest? And I think one of the reasons, Betty, is because following the IMF reviews that have been happening in the country, one of the things that IMF has recommended is, guys, you need to rationalize your exemptions. You need to reduce your exemptions. So government has proposed for infrastructure bonds, will now be taxing you at 5%. It's no longer tax-free. It's at 5%. Is it a good thing? I think for individuals, you're still paying a much lower interest rate than tax rate than you would ordinarily at 15%. You're only paying 5%. But certainly, it may have the impact of discouraging smaller investors. Because remember, most of the guys who invest in these infrastructure bonds are actually pension funds. And pension funds are still tax exempt in their own right. So they will not be affected by this. So what you would call the retail investors are the ones who would probably be feeling the hit in paying the 5% tax. So I think it's really part of government's push to rationalize the exemptions. And you've had government saying the amount of tax that we are foregoing is too much, so we need to start scaling back so that we can try and balance our books. You started by saying it's a very delicate balancing act. How do we balance our books? And I think that's really one of the proposals.
Right, it's a balancing act. Maina, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of, because ultimately we agree the government is looking for more revenue. There has to be, there are those measures that definitely have to be put in place. And the rate that has been proposed is 5%, affecting locals. For non-residents, we still don't have a rate. So we are saying for FDI, foreign direct investment, they are still happy. They will still not be taxed on the investments on these boards. So it's mainly for the local players. So it's a case of if the government goes ahead with this one, then they should then probably consider, letting go the ones that are hurting almost every other Kenyan, because 5% is